Welcome to our podcast, Bolivia, Political Crossroads. Your hosts are Ernesto and Paul Rackman. In this episode, Ernesto and I will be discussing developments in the case of the general election fraud carried out October 20th, the same fraud that would have facilitated a first-round victory for ex-President Evo Morales and would have led to an illegal and unconstitutional fourth consecutive term, and that ultimately ignited 21 days of social unrest that eventually resulted in Morales' resignation. We will also touch on the announced and potential presidential candidacies as we move forward towards new elections programmed for April of 2020. Now we bring you episode 2. Thanks for listening.
The first topic, we have a pending analysis of the fraud that was committed in the elections in Bolivia. And I say pending because the final report from the OAS just came out. And the final report is tremendous. There has been a fraud, a very broad fraud, and a fraud that has definitely had a big impact on the final results. So I would like for you, Paul, to go into a more detailed analysis of the report, and maybe after that I should intervene with the legal analysis of it, which I think is very important too. So if you go with the facts, and then I go with the legal part that'll get, and then we can both do a political analysis. So
Sure.
Can you proceed?
Okay. So there's a couple things here that basically the final report mirrors obviously more in depth what came out in the initial report that was released. I believe it was the day of or the day before Morales resigned, right? And
Right.
so one of the criticisms was that, it's just a preliminary report and it only takes into account the quick count, the TREP for the Spanish acronym. And what we're seeing in the final report that was released, I believe on today's Saturday, so I guess that was the beginning of the week. Right. Is that you've got two major issues here. Basically, what the report breaks down is it breaks down the different irregularities by level of how severe they were. And so, among the most severe was that you've got this outside server. So the OEP, or the electoral authority, when they set up an election, they have to have servers to process the data, and they have to know which servers they're using, right, and make sure that they're secure. And right. So what the OAS delegation found was that there was a hidden server that none of the authorities, and we're talking about the people at the very top, the presidenta, the what's her name, Choque,
right,
and the other vocales, the other top authorities, had not willfully or not initially, they didn't give the delegation that information that this outside server existed. And what they were able to discover was that on this server, there was access given also to what would you say, like an advisor or a technician who had nothing to do. He wasn't an electoral authority employee. He wasn't a government employee, because the government does have, I don't remember the name of it, the technology agency that's basically in charge of overseeing technological issues for these kinds of processes. And this guy had access, and it also is evident from the data logs that he had manipulated the data or the information on that server. So, I mean, if you read between the lines there, what that basically says is that the election result data was manipulated or changed on a hidden server, which is it's pretty damning.
Right, and by a third party that was not in. Yeah, by a third party that was not part of the process, right? Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So I think that's the biggest bomb that was dropped. Then on another level, you've got the forms that are filled in by hand, the actas, which are basically the results from each voting table. It's a summary, right, of the vote counts from each table, and the OAS delegation only revised like a small percentage, like 4 or 5%, something like that. I don't remember the exact number. But of those actas that were checked, They had handwriting analysts. Sorry, they had that found that multiple actas at voting sites were filled out by the same person, when the rules state that each acta is filled out by a different person, because each table has its own little group. And so you've got multiple actas that have been filled out by the same person. In all cases, those actas had votes or a percentage of votes that heavily favored the mas, which I think that it was an average of like 77% or something like that, which is pretty darn high.
Right.
And so you've got it on two levels here. You've got the hidden server with data that been manipulated, and that the electoral authority was not being upfront about with the OAS delegation. And then you've got the actas themselves, which are the handwritten reports that come directly from the voting tables, that showed a heavy unquestionable tendency that they'd been fraudulently filled out.
Right.
Whether it was by the same person or if they were forging other people's signatures. And so those are the two different things you've got. Now, Evo Morales, when he spoke publicly about this the other day, said, oh, well, it's only 226 actas that they found that have errors or that are questionable. Mm-hmm. But that's 226 of the very small percentage which they had time to evaluate over their 12-day period. And so, if you looked at all of them, I'm sure you'd find the same thing across the board. And then another thing, real quick, before I let you chime in, is that one of the other criticisms was that the quick count was something entirely separate from the final official count, which is not the case at all. It's misleading to say that. Really what happens is that the official count is just the processing of the data, or a final processing of the data, formalizing what the quick count already shows. That there's no difference between the two, really. And so basically between the quick count and the final count, there is no difference.
Okay.
So that's what I can tell you.
Okay. No, I think there was a very good summary of the report. I read part of the report, and there was that's what it is, basically what you just mentioned. Okay, I have a couple of comments here from the legal perspective. One, I'm going to start with the not easier things to understand, but the more obvious things, and then I'll end up with something that is not as obvious. Okay, first, definitely there are crimes committed here, clear crimes. As you mentioned in your summary, they have forged, they have altered, they have changed the numbers in the reports. In Spanish, they're called actas. I've looked at the legal dictionary, and there's no such thing as a translation from actas to English. Yeah, but basically, what it is,
I've given up trying to translate it.
It's a formal report. It's a formal report that says this has happened. And that's what an acta is. It's something takes place, and somebody has to say that is exactly what took place. And that's a report, except that it's signed by an authorized. By an authorized personnel from the country, from the state. So this is exactly what happened. People go and they start voting at 8:00 in the morning, and the voting ends at 4:00 in the afternoon. And after that, they do a counting of the votes. And when the counting ends, somebody fills up the spaces and says, "We have 300 people that voted in this mesa," which is a table, and then they distribute the votes. They say, 60 votes go for the MAS, 40 votes will go for Comunidad Ciudadana, so forth and so on. And then they add up all these numbers. And once they add up all these numbers, they end up with the final results of that acta, which is the report. And the acta is signed. Who signs the acta? There's authorities in every table. There are authorities. Basically, it's the president, the secretary, and there are also people from the political parties that are supervising. This is important. I want this to be clearly understood by the people that are listening to us. There are people that are selected through
Randomly.
Randomly, right? That are going to be the president, the vice president, and the secretary of the table. But then the parties have the legal right to be there through a representative. So there is there should be one representative from the MAS, for example. There should be one representative from Comunidad Ciudadana, which is Mesa's party. There should be one representative from Bolivia Dijo No, which was Ortiz's alliance, and so on and so forth. There should be one from from each political party or alliance of parties. So all these people sign up in ACTA, which is the report. And as you mentioned, there are actas that have been forged. That means that, as you also said, the same signature, the same type of letter has been used in order to fill up many, many reports. And I think that most of those reports that the OAS looked at were reports from Argentina. I mentioned this because it's not only in the report, it's much easier to detect who did it, because in Argentina, the authorities are the people from the Bolivian consulate in Argentina. Those are the guys that are responsible to do this. So it's not that hard to see, hey, who is the responsible guy here? No, the responsible guy is the consul, the Bolivian consul in Buenos Aires. That's the person who has to be summoned and brought into the process there. So there is that. There's forgery. Forgery is a crime, as it is in most countries in the world. And I think that it should be investigated. Yeah, definitely. Who the forgers were. Number two, with relationship to the digital crimes, there is also a crime that's clearly stated there in the Bolivian law, electoral law. It says that any modifications through the computers are typified as a crime, and they have like five years of jail. So that's clearly stated there. It should be investigated, and the people that are responsible for this crimes should get into jail. Okay, that's the easy concepts. These are crimes, and they have jail terms, and we have to find them. Okay, no problem about that. Getting into the second stage of my analysis. Mrs. Choque, who was the president of the Electoral Tribunal in Bolivia, would commit crimes in order to favor the president. Would she commit these crimes because for her own will? I doubt it. Somebody has to step in and say, Mrs. Choque, do this or do that. Like you mentioned, there was a third party bringing information to the system, to the computer system, and she had to know that somebody had to when they
she actually hired him.
Yeah. So
I don't know if you just yesterday the name, or I think it was last night or sometime yesterday afternoon, the name came out, and honestly, right now, it escapes me.
Right,
but they do have they do know who the person is at this point.
Yeah, they hired this person, and the contracts were signed, and they were probably signed by Miss Choque. So Miss Choque did this willfully. So somebody told her to do this, and most likely Evo Morales told her to do this. I don't know if directly or indirectly, but Evo Morales has to be involved in this. It's not like he didn't know what was happening in the tribunal. Well, he had to know what was happening in the tribunal because they were acting on his behalf, because they were favoring him. It can't be that all these people just acted on themselves and made all this crimes because they were so.
If you recall, sorry to interject here. Sure, if you recall, when she was apprehended, which was just a couple days after Morales resigned, right, she said in a live interview on TV that she was a prisoner of decisions imposed upon her. Right. Something like that. A prisionero de decisión impuestas. Right. Which basically means that somebody higher up told me to do this. And that's why I'm.
Right. That's obvious, Yeah. So that somebody is not so hard, because it's either Evo Morales directly, and if it's not Evo, it's probably one of the persons closest to Evo, which is the minister of the presidency, for example. That's one of the most questionable guys in the history of the Republic of Bolivia, de la Quintana. So one of these guys told her what to do, and if you grab one of the ministers and start investigating, this guy will probably say that Evo ordered all this. But my point is that they have to investigate this till the end and find not only Ms. Choque, who was the instrumental author of all these crimes, but who was really behind her. And sooner or later, they'll get to the point, which is Evo. Okay, that's the investigation part, the criminal investigation part. There's something that is very interesting, Paul, here, and it is, you probably heard it, and I don't know if people that are new to politics in Bolivia understand this. In the Bolivian election law, there is no clause that allows the annulment of the whole process. In fact,
Right,
this is
yeah.
interesting. In fact, there's a clause that says that the elections cannot be annulled as a whole. This is Article 190 from the law, which is called the Electoral Regime Law. And that Article 190 said exactly that, says you cannot annul the whole election. The question is, why does it say that? It's not that somebody thinks that in Bolivia people are just good and never nothing will happen bad. It's Article 190. It's a preclusion of the process. Electoral processes, referendums, and revocatory of the mandate cannot be annulled by no cause under any circumstances. I'm translating the article right now. So this is interesting because the question is, why does that clause exist? Now I'll explain it. When Bolivia came into a democratic process, during the 70s, Bolivia was under military regimes, part of the 60s too, 60s and 70s. By the end of the 70s, there was a big trend of democratization, not only in Bolivia, in the Americas, if not in the world. Who was leading this democratization process? The United States. Who in the United States? Mr. Carter. He started the democratization process in the Americas. He was installed as president, and he became a leader of human rights, basically, and through that direction, he pressed all these countries, especially through its economic aid, in order for these countries to call elections and democratize them. So this is exactly what happened in Bolivia. But, since these were very, very new democracies, in 1978, there was an election in Bolivia. Banzer was the president, and Banzer was not going to go to the election. He chose a military guy at that time to go to the election in a party that was formed basically by the Banzer people. And this candidate went to the election, and it was an abhorrent process, because by the end of the process, there were way more votes that he got than there were people registered in the voting registry. I don't remember the percentages, but there were, out of 100, maybe there were like 120 Bolivians that voted, which was ridiculous, Yeah, and by the end of this, they annulled the elections. They said, this is clownish, so they annulled it, and they called again for elections sometime after that. And the process worked. This new, and they changed some part of the law, and they bettered it. But this worked until 1989. In 1989, Goni Sanchez de Lozada was running for the presidency. He won the contest, but he didn't become president. Basically, because there were like 5 members of the electoral court. There were 5, and there were 2 from the MNR, which was Goni Sanchez de Lozada, 2 from ADN, and 1 from the MIR, which is a minority party then. And the ADN and the MIR co-alligated them, so they made like an alliance in order to count the votes, and they left the MNR apart. What they did was another bad thing, abhorrent. They annulled so many votes in Potosí and Beni that Goni's victory was no longer a victory. He won by very few votes, because they annulled illegally all these votes again in Potosí and in Beni. And as a result of that, they say that there was a triple, 3 parties got more or less the same, and they took his victory and they installed Banzer as president in 1989. As a result of this, Paul, there was a big upheaval in the political world of Bolivia, and the MNR was very hurt because we didn't get to the presidency, and there was a big pressure to the government from us, from the minority party, in order to have a profound change in the electoral law. As a result of that, and with the help of the U.S. Embassy at that time, it was possible to change the law. When the law changed, these were the main changes. The law said that all the political parties were to be in every desk. And in every desk, there were to be, as I said, people from the political parties, and they had to sign the actas. And the only way to annul actas was at the desk. In other words, you could not annul
Right. Okay. So
2,000. You can only annul one acta because your political party was there counting those votes, and your delegate would say this was bad. Somebody did something wrong here, so I propose to annul this, and they will annul that one particular desk. And if there were people in 1,000 of those desks, they could annul 1,000 desks, provided that all the political parties were being represented in those desks. Okay, so there was no way in which you would annul an election. You would annul one desk or 10 desks or 100 desks
at a time.
or 1,000 desks, but not the whole process. That was the whole idea behind this. But see, that idea eroded in this last 14 years because a very important thing happened in this 14 years. There were no political parties. If you look at the people that were the delegates of those desks in this last election of the 20th of October, you will find, I'm certain of that most political parties did not have delegates in most of the desks in Bolivia. I'm sure of that because these parties were very small. Most of them are very small. You know, for example, Ortiz's political party, which is Bolivia Dijo No. They are basically a Santa Cruz party. They don't have delegates in La Paz or Cochabamba or Potosí or Oruro or Chuquisaca or Tarija. They were basically a regional party. So whenever there were problems in desks in the Altiplano of La Paz, there was no delegate from that party. And there was probably no delegate even from Comunidad Ciudadana, which was the second most voted party. Comunidad Ciudadana was Carlos Mesa's party. Carlos Mesa did have delegates in the cities, probably in the city of La Paz, in the city of Cochabamba, in the city of Santa Cruz, but not in the rural areas and probably not in the smaller cities of Bolivia also. So the MAS was basically alone doing this whole business. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's why the law didn't work the way it was intentioned to work, because that precept of the law could work if there were delegates all over the country from different political parties. There weren't. There were in all the desks. There were basically people from the MAS. The MAS people controlled things, and whenever they elected the president and the secretary, even though they were elected from the people that were going to vote in those desks, they controlled the situation as far as revoking the count, because they had their delegates there, not the other parties. That's why it didn't work. And then they forged, and then they did all the other things. But the political parties really didn't have a clue about this. That's why when the accusations of fraud were made, the big accusations did not come from the political parties. Mesa didn't have fundamental accusations. He said there was a fraud, but he didn't prove there was a fraud. Basically, you have seen this engineer, Villegas, who came out with a good analysis, basically an analysis from the computer point side. And then I think the people from Santa Cruz also contributed with some facts that were found out by the School of Engineers in Santa Cruz, that also sent their investigation, the results of their investigation, to the OAS people. But basically, it's the OAS people doing the research, and the OAS people doing the analysis, and the OAS people concluding this analysis. The political parties, all I'm trying to say is that the political parties didn't have a say-so here. because the political parties did not exist in Bolivia. That's the point here. There is no organicity.
Presentation and
There's no political parties in Bolivia, because that's what authoritarian regimes conquer. They finally win, and they finally have a political system where they are the only political party in Bolivia right now at this point. Even though Evo Morales was defeated, the only political party that has organization in Bolivia is his political party, the MAS. The other guys, such as Mesa or Pumari or Camacho, do not have political parties. They're basically political figures that will get vote because people are supporting them, but they don't have a structure. They're not like in the States. Democrats have a structure all throughout the United States. So are Republicans. They're organized in every little town in the United States. This is not happening in Bolivia because authoritarian regime erase political parties of the opposition, and they leave no organizations alive. So right now, Bolivia is going through a process of curing the political system in Bolivia, and that curing will take time. It's not easy to get people around political parties again because people are uneasy about acting in politics. That's basically what I was trying to explain. I don't know if I was clear, but that's the point. There are no political parties. The political parties did not play a role in the representation process of the fraud. It was basically the OAS and some groups of engineers or engineers alone that did the findings in computerized systems. And the forgery was found out by the OAS because it was so obvious, because they could read that the letter was the same 100 or 200 times, But now, the last point about the legal issue is, then how did the system annul the elections? Through another law. They had to write up a law in November, sometime in November, when there was the approval of a law in order to call for new elections. In that law, there is a clause that says, there's an article that says that the elections of the 20th of October were not going to have any legal impact. That's what it says. It doesn't use the word annulment. It's more foggy than that. It just says the elections of October the 20th will not have legal effects. That's how it was done. From a pure legal perspective, that could even be illegal, because the legislative is not court. Okay, it's like the American Congress. Mm-hmm. No, they're not court. They're to approve laws, and you don't resolve litigation through a law. You have to go to a court to resolve a litigation. You have to go to a court in order to say this electoral process was a fraud. That's the task of a judge. It's not the task of a lawmaker. Technically, they would have a big problem if somebody argues that in court. They would say this law is okay. It's your will. You guys wanted to annul the elections. You got it through a law, but not through a legal proceeding, but not through a litigation proceeding. But that's just, it won't happen. I don't think that will ever happen. Nobody has ever said anything about this. But legally, that's the issue. They have annulled the elections through a law. And lawmakers are not there to annul elections. They're there to approve laws, not to approve litigation resolutions. Well, that's it.
I hope it doesn't come back to bite them, because when you talk about it that way, and you're the legal expert here. I can imagine in a scenario, if let's say a MAS candidate won the elections, mm-hmm. If that would give him power to be able to reinstate Morales, under the argument that legally the elections from the October 20th were never annulled. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to think about that.
I'm doing my job here, I could not speak about this. I could just be silent about this, but legally, I'm doing my job. That's basically what happened. Now, since the tradition in Bolivia is not so profound in the analysis, this is not the first time it happens. I have also seen other laws that resolve litigation in Bolivia in the past. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens once in a while. It has nothing to do with elections, but I did see one time a law that resolved a millionaire problem in Santa Cruz, a debt problem. There was an enormous debt, like $40 million or more than that, a little bit more than $40 million that were in debt, cañeros in Santa Cruz. And this debt was again, resolved through a law. It said that they were no longer debtors. This is an old law that was approved somewhere in the 90s, I think. And I read one time the law, and my conclusion was that this was stupid, because in that case there was a trial. They were actually in a trial, but the cañeros had such a clout in politics that they said, no, we're not. This is not good enough. This judge is not good enough. We're going to take to Congress, and Congress is going to resolve this issue. They resolved it through a law. And that's not correct. They cannot do. The legislature is not there to resolve litigation again. And this is what happened in these elections. They couldn't do it through legal ways. They couldn't have the Tribunal Electoral to annul this process because, again, they couldn't have the law states exactly the opposite. I read it to you, exactly the opposite. Article 190 says you cannot annul election. You can never annul election. You can only annul desks of each desk has 300 voters. That's all you can annul. You can annul one desk, 100 or 10,000 desks, but you cannot go with a broad idea and say, the whole election was annulled. No, that couldn't happen. But it did happen. But it wasn't an annulment done by a judge. It was an annulment done by the legislature, which, as I said, can be questioned in the future. Hope it doesn't, but, well, it's my task. I have to give my legal opinion on this. Yeah, I feel I have to do it, even though it doesn't work in favor of. But what happens a lot is that in the end, what prevails is politics, I once read a book,
and you have to
many years ago, Paul, when Reagan became president, he assigned. This has nothing to do with this, but it's again the triumph of politics. There was a book that's called The Triumph of Politics. Who wrote the book? The guy that was named to the Office of Management and Budget in 1980. This guy was a theologian, a very bright theologian. And Reagan put him in that place. And when Reagan started his process, he was a very conservative guy. And the guy that went to the OMG, to the Office of Management and Budget Office, was a very conservative guy. Basically, what they were trying to do is reduce government to its maximum. That was the whole thing. But they never could do it, And this guy resigned. I don't remember his name right now. He resigned after like 9 months in government. And he said, this is bullshit, because this is all politics. When these guys come, these big enterprises or this group of people, and they say, hey, we need to do this big public work, or we need to do this big contract in order to produce arms or to produce whatever, and they signed all these contracts, and finally the budget wasn't reduced too much. In fact, I think it grew for a while, and he resigned, and he wrote a book, and he said, the triumph of politics. The revolution never could come by. Our revolution from the right, from the conservative party, could never come by. So I resigned. Triumph of politics. It happens everywhere. If it happens in the States, in Bolivia, it's easier for it to happen because we don't have a big tradition of people being very strict about the laws and what the tribunals have to do, and so on and so forth. And many of the decisions in Bolivia are just political decisions, and I think this is a political decision because, as you said in our last podcast, 90% of the people were out in the streets against the government, against the fraud. The fraud was too evident, was obvious. So somebody had to say that this was a fraud. Since it couldn't be the tribunal of elections, it was the legislature. It's a political decision, basically. It will prevail. Don't worry about that.
So let's talk about the potential candidacies here. Well, the potential ones and the ones that have already been announced. So one thing I believe what they've come up with in this new law to call new elections is they're aiming for April, right? Sometime in April. I don't know if that's possible or not. You've already got candidates that have announced they're going to run. Carlos Mesa, obviously. Being the first, he announced very early, which I don't think is much of a surprise if he was the second place candidate in October 20th. Mm-hmm. And then at this point, well, I guess you've got the guy known as Chi, who doesn't have a party anymore because he
the Korean.
I don't know how you say transfugo, right? And
the Korean guy.
What's that?
The Korean guy.
Yeah, the Korean guy. And basically the party he was running for dropped him because I don't think he has any integrity in terms of, what he's running for. He's just, let's not give him much airtime. Mm-hmm. And then you've got Luis Fernando Camacho,
right,
who has announced that he's running for president. But the funny thing is that, everybody's been talking about this whole time that you were going to be looking at a ballot with Camacho as president and Marco Antonio Pumardi as vice president, who was the other civic leader from Potosi during the whole, I don't even call it the uprising or the opposition protest that resulted in Morales' resignation. Mm-hmm. And I think we talked about this last night on the phone that the initial polls, there was a survey mm-hmm. Where if elections were today, who would you vote for? Mm-hmm. And it was basically a tie between the MAS candidate, which was, what's his name? Andrónico.
Yes.
Rodriguez, is that
correct,
it?
Yes.
Who's I think he's the vice president of the Cocaleros in Chapare. Not even 30 years old yet. I think he's 29 or 30. Camacho and Pumardi are all tied at 16%, and you've got Mesa with 14%, right. And a whole bunch of people who didn't respond or don't know who they'd vote for. There have been rumors, as you were saying, that Janine Áñez, the interim president right now, was thinking about running, but she's publicly stated that no, she doesn't have an intention of running, which I think is a very smart decision politically on her part, because it would take I think it would call into question the role that her government is playing as interim government, mm-hmm. and add weight to the argument of those that insist that everything that happened was a coup. Because, if it's an interim government, then what's she doing, running for president? And when they're trying to reconstruct the electoral authority and under her direction, then that, as far as I'm concerned, it wouldn't look very good. And so I think that's a smart decision on her part. And at least at this point, she says she won't be running. So, yeah, but what does call my attention there is the issue between Camacho and Pumardi, who looked like they were best friends, and they were like the national symbol of unity of the, if you will, the Cambas and Collas uniting during the opposition protests that played out over those 3 weeks. And now it seems like they're kind of Pumardi is avoiding the issue. I don't think he wants to run as a vice president. The way I read it, it seems like he probably feels like he's being used, and I don't think it was very responsible on Camacho's part to announce the binomio, the what do you call that in English? The bill or the mm-hmm. ticket, with him as president and Pumardi as vice president. Right. And he did it unilaterally, or at least he did it without Pumardi present, which I don't think it's the smartest thing to do. If you're announcing who your vice president is going to be on the ballot, you should probably do it while you're together. But it seems like he was doing it to place pressure on him. And my view of this whole Camacho presidency is that he's been calculating politically from very early on, despite him having said the contrary, that he never had intentions to run and everything. I'm not blaming him or judging him. So I think it's a bit of a misstep on Camacho's part to act independently or unilaterally in terms of making those declarations. What has come out while we've been talking is that officially Camacho has said that he's going to be a candidate without Pumardi as the vice president on the ballot. So that opens up the possibility for either for Pumardi to run for president on his own or to not, which would probably work out in Camacho's favor, obviously. So I guess that's what we're looking at right now. I don't know what you think about the panorama here and what we're looking at.
Okay, just so that our listeners can get a view, a more political view on this. We that live in Bolivia know the people, the candidates. I don't know if pretty well, but we have a good gist about them.
I think we know who they are as people, but what we don't know much at this point in terms of proposals or
right.
any types of official plans that they've got, which is, for me, seems a little concerning that you've got, I'm concerned anyway, that you've got people who appear to already have their minds made up without having any idea whatsoever what their proposals or plans will be as candidates, just based on, at this point, it just seems kind of like a popularity contest. And anywho, go ahead. Sorry.
It's like a beauty contest. You're right on that. But, these guys have a history, and that's what I just want to mention, Sometimes I'm a little radical in my observations, but I think it's also important to know certain facts, I've mentioned to you before this, the Comité Cívico de Santa Cruz, and this is where I become very radical, actually is like the Ku Klux Klan in the United States, If there is a racist, well, first let's start on this, Racism has invaded the panorama, the political panorama throughout the world. I think today racist positions are viewed very importantly in the United States. They are very important in European politics.
Definitely.
And again, they are important in Bolivia, very important in Bolivia. Racism has become part of the political discussion in Bolivia, as it has become in many countries in the world, and there's a lot of racism here. So, in my opinion, if there is a political organization that has been racist from this inception until today, it is the Comité Cívico de Santa Cruz.
Macho, up until just a few days ago, was president of.
Yeah, that's correct. He expresses that institution. He has tried in the latter month to show a different perspective, a different profile of himself. He has gone to La Paz, which is very important for a Comité Cívico de Santa Cruz leader. He has gone to La Paz and done politics in La Paz, which has never happened before, and this is something in his favor. I had never seen a president of the Comité Cívico de Santa Cruz being involved in La Paz so actively, so dramatically, because he met with the indigenous leaders in La Paz, and he waved the flag from the indigenous people in Bolivia. He got very involved in this. But, these are personal positions. What is behind Camacho is an institution, and the institution is very racial, very racist, racist in terms of Bolivian, obviously in Bolivian terms. This is basically they're against indigenous people from the west of Bolivia. They are against the Indians of Bolivia, because as we both know, there are Indians in Santa Cruz, yes, but there are very few of them. You can't be too racist in Santa Cruz, because the indigenous people of Santa Cruz are I don't know, 1% or 2% of the population.
Yeah.
When you talk about indigenous people in Bolivia, you're basically talking about the Aymaras and the Quechas, which are from the western part of Bolivia. So that's the end of it. These people are very racist, and I think that it was a contradiction if you would have gone with Pumari, for example. I'm pleased that it didn't happen, because it was a contradiction. Pumari cannot go under the umbrella of the Ku Klux Klan. It doesn't have consistency there. And I'm glad they broke up in those terms. I think they're still friends. They try to underline the fact that they're still friends, that they have fought together. But when you go to an election, I think there has to be some coherence in your proposal and in the institutions that are behind you, And I don't think that Camacho would have been exactly coherent in going under the umbrella of the Comité Cívico, which is not a political party. But again, if they go together, what is there behind Camacho? The Comité Cívico, the persons that are with Camacho right now and that have been in the cabinet or are still in the cabinet are people from the Comité Cívico. The Minister of Defense, Mr. Lopez, is a person from the Comité Cívico of Santa Cruz. he managed the whole image part of the Comité Cívico. I think he works in communications, and he has been a military guy before, but he's a communications guy in Santa Cruz. Justiniano was part of the Comité Cívico, and he was there on behalf of Camacho too. So what is behind Camacho is the Comité Cívico. Whatever political party they will be represented by in the elections, the whole philosophy behind that, although it is not explicitly said, it is the Comité Cívico. And the Comité Cívico is a very racist institution in Bolivia, and I'm just glad that they are not going with Camari. Pumari, on the other hand, is an indigenous leader, and I think he breaks the MAS. I don't know if he breaks him in two, but it will be hard.
He's definitely got the potential to take away quite a few votes from the MAS.
There's no question about that.
Because I don't think Camacho is going to be able to do that.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And one important thing is that unless one of the things that kind of something that everybody knows but doesn't talk about is that the business sector of Santa Cruz, lately, at least in the past couple of years, has been supporting the MAS. In that sense, when I say that Camacho can't pull those votes, there's people in Santa Cruz voting for MAS candidates purely because of their economic interests, and not because of any ideology or anything like that. And so I think those votes will be swayed towards Camacho if he can win them back over, depending on what policy proposals and whatnot. So anyway, go ahead. Yeah, no, definitely that is true. It's important that you bring the business people from Santa Cruz. Yes, they were supporting the Morales' government. That is absolutely true. The question is, did they do it willfully? I don't think so. I think they basically did because they're obliged to do it. They feared the regime was a dictatorship. So these people were probably obliged to get into businesses with Morales and Garcia Linera. That's my guess, and I think it's a pretty well educated guess, because these people are not really the people that are the leaders of business people in Santa Cruz are pretty close to the Comité Cívico and pretty close to the ideas of the Comité Cívico. But okay, we'll see that in the future how Santa Cruz behaves in relationship to Pumari. But I've seen the other day Quispe speaking, and he's a very funny guy, but he's a very bright guy because he makes his points very clear. Quispe, the guy that is from the political party of
Rafael Quispe,
of the president. Yeah, Rafael Quispe, he said very clearly, half of Santa Cruz is indigenous, he said, and half of that's not a vote from the Comité Cívico, that's a vote for the MAS. But see, half of Santa Cruz now has another alternative. And that's very important. That's Pumari. In 14 years, the indigenous people in Bolivia have a good part of them are not happy with Morales. Not only the indigenous people from the lowlands, also the indigenous people from the highlands, the Aymaras and the Quechuas, they don't feel represented by Evo Morales in many ways. And we talked the last time, the Cocaleros from La Paz, they are not with Evo Morales. He put them into jail, so he jailed them. So all these indigenous people that are not with Morales have an option with Pumari. That's important. My feeling, Paul, is that in the end, I think Carlos Mesa will resurge again. It's probably something that I want also, because I think he's the most coherent of them all. He has a good feeling about Bolivian politics. He more or less knows where he wants to go. I don't think these guys, neither Pumari nor Camacho, have a clue about administering a national government. I think they're not because they're young.
They don't have the experience.
Not because they're young. There are people at 38. Well, Simón Bolívar was in his 30s when he got the independence of many countries in Latin America. He was very young, but he knew from his age 18 what he was going to do in life. And he read throughout the years politics and philosophy, and then he went to the ground and battled. This is not the case on these two guys. Especially, I think Camacho. Camacho was basically a business guy and a lawyer, and then he got into the political arena in Santa Cruz, but not from the political and with a national perspective. He was within the Comité Cívico. I think he knows very little, if nothing, about mining in Bolivia. Mining is basically done in the higher lands. I don't think he knows. I think he knows very little about the development of departments such as Potosí or Tarija. What can he offer? If you interview him at this point, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't know. If you or I ask him, what do you have to do in order to promote the development of Tarija, he wouldn't know what to answer, because I don't think he knows anything about Tarija other than go and drink wine once in a while. But he doesn't have the background, he doesn't have the experience, he doesn't have the academic knowledge about Bolivia. It's not a complicated country, but you have to know the country. It's like in the States. If you want to be the president of the States, you have to answer things about Texas or Arizona or California or Missouri or New York, but you have to have the whole picture of the economic growth in the U.S. The same applies to Bolivia. You have to know the 9 departments and see what they produce, how they can grow, how the situation of employment is in each one of these places, and the whole racial issue too in each one of these departments. I don't think Camacho has a gist about that, and I don't think Pomari has.
Same sense. I was just going to say the same thing. There was an interview with El Deber Radio the other day where they interviewed Pomari, and one of the first things he said was that he was surprised at how wrong he was about what Santa Cruz was like. And he didn't say it directly, but what he said basically was he'd never been in Santa Cruz before.
Right.
and if you're running for president and you don't know Santa Cruz, then it's basically an echo of what you just said about Camacho. But
what are we talking about, right? It's what 1/3 of the economy is here, or probably 40%.
40%.
So if you don't know about Santa Cruz, what are we speaking about? You have to have an opinion about the soya business, about the sugar business, about the alcohol and the sugar business. You have to have knowledge about what's happening in Santa Cruz. And if you don't have that, and you came here for the first time or the second time in your life, you're lost in politics. Bolivian politics is the whole country. It's not just Potosí or just La Paz. But see, a very important issue that we're talking about, the only political party that has a national vision is the MAS. I insist on that. I'm not a Masista. I hate Evo Morales and Garcia Linera because they finally made a throne which was an authoritarian throne in Bolivia, and they erased the political parties. But in terms of having a national view, they have a national view. I think Carlos Mesa has a national view as a person, but not as a political party. He doesn't have a political party. He has friends in La Paz. I think he has many friends in La Paz, and especially in Sopocachi, which is his neighborhood, But I don't think he has friends all over Bolivia. He doesn't have an organization in Bolivia. So what he has done basically is pick up people that sympathize with him in the 9 departments. I don't think that's enough, though, I know some of the people that are supporting him in Santa Cruz. And some are his old friends, but many of them are young people that were in the platforms. And my suspicion is that those people are also like Camacho and like
inexperienced.
Too young, inexperienced.
But they're running locally, where there's a big difference between holding a local office and working on a national level, especially being a president. So,
right.
And if I had to, I'm making a guess here, but generally most people. The younger people that are political actors are working locally and then kind of work their way up.
This is true.
So, in closing, we're going to talk about the immunity law. I don't know if we have time for that, or if you want to mention anything right now, or do you want to close on this topic of the candidacies?
I think we'll have time the next issue of the podcast, because that deserves some depth. It's a very important, and it's not going to close today because they haven't approved yet the law. They have only approved it in the lower chamber. It's to be seen if they're going to approve it in the Senate. It's to be seen if the president will sign it or not. She already has said that she won't sign it. And then once she rejects signing, it can become law only in the Congress. It become law if the president of the assembly signs it. But that's to be seen yet. I think that this topic can wait for the next time. I'm pleased with what we did today because we're at the state of the art in our commentaries.
Yeah. Any ideas if you had to throw out a guess or your inkling in terms of what will happen in the election, or are we going to see any other candidates that will be major contenders besides the ones we've already mentioned that are Camacho, Marty, Mesa, and Andrónico?
Well, again, I insist, there were no political parties. There are no political parties. So the only new actors that had erupted in this last month are these two guys. It's basically Camacho and Pumari. And they have come about as a result of the citizenry protest against the government. The protests had brought these two leaders up because they were leaders in their regions, and the Comité Cívicos of Santa Cruz and Potosí. And then they became national heroes because they were very intrepid. They went to La Paz and they fought against Evo Morales, and they're heroes now, but they're heroes without knowledge to administer a country, which is very dangerous. So my inkling is that in the end, Carlos Mesa will have a good vote. I hope he becomes president because we have administered a nation. This is not a club. This is a nation, and we need somebody that has some knowledge about this business. And I think the only guy that has a knowledge and a national view is Mesa. The other guys are not. But again, politics can take idiots to power. This is true. I have no other word. Because look at what happened in Argentina. There's a lady there that's an idiot. She administers so bad, but she's the vice president now. I don't want to get into the U.S. politics.
Yeah, we don't.
Many people will say there's an idiot.
I know what you're inferring.
Yeah. People. That's democracy. It happens. It happens. And I hope it doesn't happen here because we are a very poor country and we need the best administration we can get. There are countries that can afford themselves to have a bad president because the system works by itself. Business works by itself in the U.S. They don't need a great president in order to have good enterprises. Google will work with the actual president, with another president. Google's still there, But in Bolivia, the economy works a lot with the state, with the government. Enterprises the big enterprises are government enterprises. The whole business of oil is owned by the government. Yeah, the mining sector also. So we need a good administrator as president. So we'll have time to debate more about the candidates. That's my thoughts about the future. And yes, next time we should talk about the immunity law because that's very important to discuss. Let's see what happens with it too.
Sure. All right. Well, hey, I enjoyed this immensely, and thank you to everybody who's listening. And please share comments, suggestions. Any feedback is greatly appreciated. And until next time, Ernesto.
Well, thank you very much. Have a good time in Panama. And I'll try to have a good time here in Santa Cruz. Enjoy. This is the good thing about podcasts. You can technology allows us to be anywhere in the world and make the commentary. So thank you very much for your help, your cooperation, and your ideas in this whole process. We'll keep on growing. I think we're doing better. We did better than the first time, and the third time should be better, and so on in the future.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Have a good time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.